And we are live. Fantastic. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this live stream. We are experiencing some technical difficulties, which thanks to my dear friend, Mr. Fox, who is a character in Batman and is very, very clever, ingenious, in fact, in terms of his grasp of technology. Hopefully we fixed it. Hope that everyone is well and managing. I mean, it's a challenging situation for everyone. I'm sure that for many of us, the way the world is at the moment has required a completely new routine, just a new way of looking at life in general. I'd like to take the opportunity for a little bit, perhaps a little bit of good humour, and not too many in jokes about the old Batman. It is one of my favourite trilogies. It's one of my favourite characters of all time. When I was a kid, sort of got into comics a little bit, and it was only ever Batman that did it for me. So it was more a case of just following that through into the films. And Christopher Nolan's trilogy, I mean, there have been some pretty terrible trilogies that have come out recently. The new Star Wars one, that was a travesty. But the Batman one was a fantastic one, a brilliant effort. And what was so great about the third and final installment in that trilogy, The Dark Knight Rises, I received a couple of queries from people about the way we'd spelt that in the thumbnail and the infographic. I assure you, I know how to spell night, as in your stinking English kniggets. I know knigget and I know night. It was meant to be a pun because of Pesach and the plague of darkness. We can't say plague anymore. It's not. It's a bit of a taboo word nowadays. The Dark Knight Rises. One of the things that made it such a fantastic achievement, and it's particularly Tom Hardy, who is such an underrated actor, is that what he managed to do was he followed Heath Ledger's Joker, which was the second film, and gave this larger-than-life character called Bane this fantastic personality. And what was so genius about it was how he had the mask. I mean, he was ahead of the coronavirus before any of us were. He had the mask on, and he's acting with his eyes the whole way through. And what people who enjoy watching films, or who spend too much time watching films, like to tell ourselves is that there's all sorts of deep hidden philosophical meanings behind films. And what's going on in well, I tell myself this, in the third installment of Christopher Nolan's trilogy, The Dark Knight Rises, is a discussion or like an analysis of power and control, and who holds the keys to those things, and who lives with the power and control to exert authority and decision making over other people. And what Bane as a character really comes to represent as the film progresses, whereas the Joker is all about breaking down rules, complete anarchy, there's no system whatsoever. Bane is about shifting the system in such a way that the people who think or thought lived in the illusion of having power and control suddenly one day wake up to realize that it was all a mirage, it was all an illusion, and there's nothing actually there. So that's really what the character represents. One of my favorite scenes in the entire film, and I've just been messaged by Mr. Fox from the film, by my dear friend Adam, that we've got to be careful with what we show. We kept trying to put scenes up from the film, and YouTube, with its very clever algorithms, kept taking the stream down. It's like, no, even though this is not commercial, you're not allowed to use this copyrighted image. So we're going to be very careful with it. One of the best scenes in the film, it's midway through the film, there's a character called John Daggett, and Daggett's this evil, selfish, greedy businessman who he's under the impression that Bane, the evil guy played by Tom Hardy, the big muscular villain, he's under the impression that Bane is working for him towards the ends of acquiring Wayne Enterprises, Bruce Wayne, which is Batman's alter ego. It's basically trying to make Daggett this multi-billionaire instead of a multi-millionaire that he already is. And midway through the film, there's this scene where Daggett realizes that his entire plan of acquiring Wayne Enterprises and becoming a multi-billionaire is crumbling around his feet. And he sort of marches very confidently into this opulent palace, this mansion that he lives in. And he walks in, he's just like, what the hell's going on? He's like, drags his associate with him. And he's demanding an explanation, like, why am I not in control of Wayne Enterprises? And he's trying to just blustering his way through. This associate's trying to give him an explanation. And then eventually what happens is he turns around and he goes, where's Bane? And it's sort of looking everywhere. And his associate goes, we told him it was a matter of urgency. And then suddenly out of nowhere, you hear like Tom Hardy with the mask. He's like, speak of the devil and he shall appear. And there Bane is. He appears and he's sort of nonchalantly leaning against a pillar. He's got his hands in his pockets. And Daggett, again, who believes he's in control and believes that he has the power and the authority in the room because it's his mansion, he marches straight up to Bane. And again, he's like, do I look like I'm in charge of Wayne Enterprises right now? And there's this brilliant moment where Bane sort of looks over Daggett's shoulder and he looks at the associate and he just goes, leave us. And Daggett turns and he says, no, you stay right there. I'm in charge. I just sound like a pirate for some reason. And Tom Hardy, this was totally unscripted, but Nolan loved it so much, the director, that he left it in the final cut. He sort of very gently but very deliberately places his hand on Daggett's shoulder, and you see the color drain from Daggett's face. And Bane just goes to him, do you feel in charge? And you watch his face realize that he looks up at Bane, who's this massive muscular villain that's obviously got a propensity towards violence. He looks up at him and he just goes, I've paid you a small fortune. And again, this hand, like Hardy starts sort of like stroking his cheek in the most threatening way you can imagine. And Bane looks down at Daggett and he just asks, and this gives you power over me? And you're watching this dynamic shift. The person who marched into the room really confident, thinking that he's in control and he's in charge and he's calling the shots and he decides who's going to witness the violence in the room and who's not, you suddenly realize that the guy who lived under the illusion of being in charge, which was John Daggett, this multi-millionaire, standing looking into the eyes of this muscular, huge villain who just doesn't care that he's paid him a small fortune. And you watch that power shift completing until eventually Daggett realizes he has nothing and nothing that he can turn to anymore. And that ultimately is the end of his role and his character in the film. Now, watching this, and again, as I said, like Film Box, we love telling ourselves that there's deep philosophical hidden meanings in films, and this is about power and control and authority, and then it's the sort of things we tell ourselves to feel good about stuff. But this reminded me, the whole character of Bane and what he represents and what he does in the film is it reminded me of the dynamics that go on in the narrative about the Exodus. There's really, like, when you look through the first 3 and a bit portions in the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus, there are 2 narratives running parallel to each other. One is, like, I like to call it the macro narrative. That's the big, like, this the national story. It's the story of the Jewish people, the slave nation, and the other minorities who are enslaved in Egypt. And then on the other hand, of course, the taskmasters, the ancient Egyptians, the officials, the people who are enslaving them. That's the big national picture. That's the CGI. That's the blockbuster films. That's the Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey. That's There Can Be Miracles. That's the thunder and lightning, very, very frightening. Will not let him go. Don't leave the house. We will not let you go. Don't leave the house. Stay at home. And that's the big picture. That's a picture that deals with things like justice, slavery, equality, fairness, and what's right. But then running parallel to that, there's this fascinating ongoing dialogue on a very, what I call the micro level, between Moses and Pharaoh. That's basically it. Obviously, God's involved, Aaron's involved, but the primary focus of this dialogue that runs throughout the whole narrative is just between Moses and Pharaoh. And whereas the story of the national picture, the Jewish people and the Egyptian people, that's the macro, the big, big picture. This smaller one, this narrative that runs alongside that, is really identical in so many ways to the conversation that's going on throughout The Dark Knight Rises between John Daggett and Bane. And one of them thinks he has control and thinks he lives with power, and the other one exists to demonstrate to him, you're living in an imaginary world, you're living in an illusion and a facade, and really you have nothing. So I'm gonna open up. We'll have a look at this narrative, this sub narrative, the micro picture, the Moses and Pharaoh dialogue together. I'm just gonna open this up. Hopefully, thanks to my dear friends in Fox Industries, this should be working. Yeah, that looks like it's working. So source 1. I mean, you can drop a comment if it's not. I might have to comment. Let's have a look. I'm looking at my own phone right now. I can comment to myself that it is working from what I see. So the first source that we're going to look at, which is, this is like, just to put this into context, this is before any of the plagues. I said the word again. I apologize. 1,000 apologies. Don't say the word plague. But this is before any of the plagues. And this is God's sort of first instruction to Moses and Aaron to go and speak to Pharaoh. And it goes something like this. Afterwards, Moses, after they'd spoken to God, Moses and Aaron went and they said to Pharaoh, "So says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go so that they may celebrate a festival for me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh said, "Who is this God that I should listen to him and let Israel go? I don't know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go." So they answered, "The God of the Hebrews appeared to us and said, 'Please let us go a distance of 3 days into the desert, into the wilderness, to sacrifice the Lord our God, lest he strike us with pestilence or sword.'" Now, there's a few I've highlighted in bold a couple of what struck me as being interesting aspects of this dialogue. So again, Moses and Aaron, this is the first time ever they're speaking to Pharaoh. They go into his throne room and they deliver this message, the famous words, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh turns around to Moses and he's like, "God of the Israelites." I've never sort of gets his big red book of gods out. It's like Encyclopedia Godaica, and he looks through this encyclopedia and he's like, "There's no one here called God of the Israelites. Like, I've never even heard of this God you're talking about. Why on earth would I let my nation of slaves, the backbone of my economy, why would I let them go?" And what struck me as fascinating is if you look at the bold, the bits that I've highlighted here, is there's a subtle shift in the way that Moses presents or represents God to Pharaoh from the first place, his first statement, to his response. In the first statement, he calls him the God of Israel. This is the God of destiny, the God that intervenes in human history, the God that has a plan for history and for destiny. The God of Israel, it's a God of splendor, of majesty, of might. And yet that changes. If you look at the verse 3, when Pharaoh says, "I've never heard of him, what are you talking about? I'm certainly not going to let your people go." Moses almost backtracks. He takes a step back and recoils and says, "Look, the God of the Hebrews appeared to us and said, 'Please let us go a distance of 3 days to have this festival in the desert,' probably the first Coachella." And what's striking about this, the subtle difference, is if you picture yourself, imagine yourself as Pharaoh. Pharaoh's sitting in his throne room. He just said, "I've never heard the God of the Israelites." And then Moses presents God as the God of the Hebrews. It's not as splendorous, it's not as grand, it's not as majestic as the first name. Suddenly, this is a name of a God of a nation who Pharaoh has successfully enslaved almost in totality. And Pharaoh's hearing this name, he's like, "Oh, the God of the Hebrews. I mean, the people I've enslaved successfully can't be a very powerful God if I've enslaved his people." So what's happening in this first dialogue, and you'll notice the climax of it, the conclusion, when Moses says, "We've got to go to celebrate in the desert because if we don't, God might strike us." There's not even a hint of a threat. There's not even a hint of Moses sort of placing his hand gently on Pharaoh's shoulder and saying, "Do you feel in charge?" I hope Lee's watching and I hope he's enjoying this. Nothing. There's no threat. There's no speech, there's no education, there's no "let me elucidate you as to who this God is." There's no like, "Oh, I'll tell you a thing or two about this God." Moses takes a step back and says to Pharaoh, "You're right, it's the God of the Hebrews. And the Hebrews are the people who you've successfully enslaved. So you're right, it can't be such a powerful God. And in fact, if we disobey God, he's going to strike us. We are the ones who are going to be punished, not you and your people." So what Moses is doing in this power control dynamic dialogue between him and Pharaoh is at first he takes a step back and gives Pharaoh complete room and complete illusion of control and says, "The ball is in your court. If you think you're in control, fair enough. You go with that." That's conversation one. I'm just going to scroll down to the second conversation. This is just after the first conversation. Pharaoh throws Moses and Aaron out and he says, "I'm not giving them straw. They're going to have to increase. The quota is going to stay the same. They can go and hunt and look for straw themselves, and they're going to have to work twice as hard." So the first conversation really doesn't go to plan at all. And Moses says to God, "What you sent me in there to secure the freedom of the Jewish people." And it just got much, much worse for them. This hasn't gone to plan at all. The whole system's crumbling. They go back in. And this time God arms them and says, "You know what, I'm going to teach you a really cool magic trick. You're going to go into Pharaoh's throne room, perform this trick, and wow everyone in the room, and now they'll take you seriously." So Moses and Aaron, I'm reading from source 2, Moses and Aaron came before Pharaoh, did just as God had commanded them. Aaron threw down his rod in the presence of Pharaoh and his courtiers. It turned into a serpent. Pretty cool trick, right? Wrong. Because then Pharaoh, for his part, he summons, he's like, clicks his fingers, he's like, "Ha ha, very nice. I saw this the other week on Penn and Teller." Summons the wise men and their sorcerers in, the Egyptian magicians. Each one takes his staff, throws it to the ground, throw him to the floor, throws it to the ground, does the same with their sorcery, the same with their own dark arts. and turn them into serpents. So the question that bothers the commentaries and always bothered me about this second intervention between Moses and Pharaoh is, I mean, you're trying to impress Pharaoh and his courtiers, his magicians and his sorcerers. So why walk into the throne room? God's like, hey, I've got a good idea. Go into the throne room and throw your staff to the floor and it will turn into a snake and everyone's going to be really impressed by it. But the problem is God knows that Pharaoh's magicians can perform the same trick, which kind of defeats the entire purpose. And again, you're left wondering, in this second intervention, this second dialogue between Moses and Pharaoh, is perhaps God himself is taking a step out of the picture and allowing Pharaoh to perpetuate and continue living in this facade, this illusion that he has power and he has control. Although if you notice right at the end of this second source, there's a subtle little hint that that power and control is starting to disintegrate in front of Pharaoh, but Aaron's rod swallowed up their staffs. And Pharaoh looks at his magicians. He's like, oh, that's a pretty neat trick. I mean, you guys, you could turn the staffs into snakes, but they couldn't eat each other. And the magicians, oh no, we've never seen this before. And suddenly there are doubts springing into Pharaoh's mind of, am I actually as in control? And do I hold as much power as I always thought I did? Slowly but surely, Moses' hand is inching towards Pharaoh's shoulder for that beautiful improvised Tom Hardy moment to ask that $1 million question. Do you feel in charge? Let's have a look at source 3. Source 3 is just before the plague of blood. Ooh, 2319. We have a good can't cough. Everyone take a step back from the screens, please. 2 meters back from the screen. Thank you very much. Source 3. God says to Moses something quite interesting. He says, go to Pharaoh first thing in the morning. Set your alarm clock nice and early as he goes down to the water and station yourself before him at the edge of the river Nile. Take with you the rod that turned into a snake, this was yesterday, and say, the God of the Hebrews sent me to you to say, let my people go. There's those famous words again, that they may worship me in the wilderness, but you've paid no heed to me until now, as in you haven't listened to me until now. So the commentaries ask something fascinating about this third dialogue, this third step in the dialogue, the ongoing micro dialogue between Pharaoh and Moses. The commentaries say, why is it that God tells Moses to go down to Pharaoh first thing in the morning and meet him next to the river Nile? It's a bit of a strange place to meet a king. Like the normal place to be received by a king is probably in the palace, like in the throne room, officially and with dignity and with honor and respect. Like why is he going down to the river Nile first thing in the morning? And there's a beautiful explanation the commentaries offer, and it's actually corroborated by sort of historical and archaeological research. The pharaohs of antiquity and the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, they styled themselves as gods. They styled themselves as deities, and this is generally like a good lesson in life, is that they realized that the extent to which they could build this mystique about their own characters and sort of mystery about who they really were, that was the extent to which the masses would believe and fall for the lie and that illusion that this pharaoh is actually a god. And therefore it comes as no coincidence, the commentaries explain, that the only time a birthday, like a happy birthday party, I'm sorry for everyone who's at home like celebrating their birthdays with virtual cakes and songs, my apologies for being insensitive. The only time a birthday is mentioned in the Torah is in the story of Joseph and the butler and the baker, and it's Pharaoh's birthday. And the significance of that is, and this is the bit that's corroborated by historical and archaeological research, is that to maintain this facade of I am a god and you know nothing about me, so who's to question otherwise, the pharaoh of antiquity would only appear in public once a year. He had his biological birthday, which no one knew. It was a state secret. No one could know, because if you're a god, you're not born biologically. And then the pharaoh would have, like the queen nowadays, would have a separate state birthday, which was their official day of celebration. And the only day we're taught that they would appear, the pharaohs would appear in public, was on their birthday. And this just built this air of mystery and mystique. Like, who is this person? We see them once a year. We never see them apart from that. Like, what are they doing the whole, what are they doing all day? They're just on Zoom and downloading house party apps and watching Netflix. Like, what's he doing all day cooped up in that palace? Maybe he actually is a god. And so God, the real God, says to Moses a brilliant thing. He says, I don't want you to go to the palace like you've been doing until now. He says, I want you, instead of that, to go and meet Pharaoh first thing in the morning by the River Nile. Now, what's he doing by the River Nile? The commentaries explain. To maintain and upkeep this facade, this illusion that I'm a deity and I transcend regular physicality and humanity, Pharaoh would get up at the crack of dawn before anyone else was awake, and he would go with only his most trusted servants and bodyguards. He'd go down behind the palace where the River Nile met the palace boundaries. He would relieve himself, as in go to the toilet, use the bathroom first thing in the morning, and then he'd go back into the palace without anyone knowing. Now, the genius here is, forgive me for calling God a genius, but the genius here is that God was saying to Moses, I want you to catch Pharaoh in the act. I don't want you to go to his palace where he sits on his throne, clearly in command, clearly in control. I want you to go and start breaking this illusion, this facade, piece by piece. And the first step of that is going to be go down to the River Nile and catch Pharaoh doing something that is so human, that so obviously pulls the rug out from his image of himself as a god, that you're going to start chipping away at this illusion. Now, if we look at the rest of Source 3, what's fascinating here is that even though God's told Moses to do this, I mean, it's possibly one of the funniest scenes in the whole Exodus narrative. Pharaoh's there, crack of dawn, he thinks no one's around, he sort of finishes doing what he needs to do, starts fastening his, I don't know, his tunic or little skirts that they whatever he was wearing, he fastens, and he looks up, and Moses and Aaron are standing there on the opposite bank of the river. Maybe they were laughing, maybe they were pointing, maybe they were live streaming it, I don't know, but you'd expect at this point Moses to turn around and say, you see, I knew you weren't a god. I knew you didn't really have power and control. And yet that speech, that moment, that eureka moment of pulling the rug out from under Pharaoh's feet is conspicuously absent. It's not there anymore. We're going step by step, and that hand is inching ever closer to Daggett's shoulder, and Moses is inching ever closer to placing it on Pharaoh's shoulder and asking him, looking him in the eye and asking him, do you feel in charge? Let's look at source 4. I'm scrolling up. Source 4, oh dear, this is after the plague of frogs, and for the first time we see a chink in Pharaoh's army. He summons Moses and Aaron, and he says, plead with God to remove the frogs from me and my people, and I'll let the people go to sacrifice to the Lord God. And Moses said to Pharaoh, and this is, again, it's just a genius line. In Hebrew, it's hit pa'er alai. He says, glorify yourself over me. When would you like me to plead? You want me to remove the frogs? There's a chink in your armor. There's a little bit of humility. You're starting to show a little bit of humanity and remorse and understanding that maybe you're living in a lie and you're trapped in an illusion that you're this all-powerful deity. So tell me, when should I plead on behalf of you and your courtiers and your people that the frogs should be removed from you and your houses, remaining only in the Nile? It's a brilliant, brilliant move. And as I said, this dialogue between Moses and Pharaoh, whereas the big macro picture, the national story of the nation of Israel and the nation of Egypt deals with the big issues, comes with 2 free staples, 50p outside Holborn Station. That's the big issue. The small issue is so human. It's remarkable because it's so unremarkable, because it teaches us so much about human psychology and how we struggle in situations of where our grasp on power and control is being taken away from us. And so Moses turns around to Pharaoh and he says, okay, I'll pray for you. I'll intervene. I'll get God to remove the frogs. When would you like me to do that, out of interest? And this is Pharaoh's opportunity. There's a chink in his armor. He says to Moses, I'll let you go. I'll let you go and serve this God of yours. I don't care. Just get rid of the frogs, please. He's pleading to Moses. This is Pharaoh's opportunity to actually take a step back and look himself in the eye and say, I'm living an illusion. I'm living a lie. And what I see myself as being makes no sense and is unsustainable, but he doesn't. Pharaoh steps forward because Moses opened that door again. He says, when would you like me to pray? And Pharaoh sees an opportunity to retake some aspect, something I can control, something I can have power over. And fascinatingly, bizarrely, he turns around to Moses and he says, oh, you can pray tomorrow. We'll be okay. We'll manage. We're running out of toilet paper and kitchen wipes, but we'll be okay for another day. Pray tomorrow to remove the frogs. And Moses says, all right, fine. I mean, you're Pharaoh. You can afford same-day delivery. You want next-day delivery? That's fine. We offer 3 to 5 business days. You can go with second-class Royal Mail. The frogs will be here for a month. Do what you want. I can remove them now. Pharaoh says, no, it's okay. Remove them tomorrow. Pharaoh is still clinging for dear life onto this illusion and his imaginary world where he is in control and the power is his. And now he goes to the final source. And as I said, Tom Hardy, Bane's hand is inching ever closer towards John Daggett's shoulder. Pharaoh said, I'll let you go. This is much later. This is after the plague of wild animals. He says, I'll let you go. Source 5 says, I'll let you go to sacrifice the Lord your God in the wilderness, but don't go far. Again, trying to grasp, to grip, to not relinquish control. Just don't go too far. Now plead for me, please put an end to this plague. Pharaoh wants it ended now. There's no preconditions, there's no quid pro quo, it's just get rid of these wild animals. And Moses said, when I leave your presence, I'll plead with God that the swarms of animals depart tomorrow from Pharaoh and his courtiers and his people, that stop acting deceitfully again by not letting this people go to sacrifice to God. That's the final source. And this is the moment that Moses places his hand on Pharaoh's shoulder. Pharaoh says, look, pray for me, pray for my nation, get rid of this plague now. He says, plead for me now, plead for me, do it now. Moses says, you know what, I've got a better idea. You'll be okay for a day. You'll be fine. I'll wait till tomorrow. The hand is now on Pharaoh's shoulder. And Moses says to him, do you feel in charge? Or am I in charge? I, the representative, the emissary of God, who's really in charge here? He puts his hand on Pharaoh's shoulder and says, I'll remove the plague when I'm well ready to remove it. And by the way, can you stop messing us around? Stop acting deceitfully, telling us we can go, and then changing your mind the entire time. This is the first time in this ongoing dialogue. This is chapters, this is 8 chapters into the book of Exodus. It's taken this long for Moses for the first time to sort of take the kid gloves off, the gloves, the mask, take the mask. Nobody knew who I was till I put on this mask. Takes the gloves off and actually threatens Pharaoh for the first time. Could have done it 8 chapters ago. Could have done it in the throne room with the staff that turned into a snake, but it's a slow, painfully slow process. I'm going to end the sharing here. We're going to go back just to regular video. And that's really this ongoing, as I said, the micro story, the parallel narrative of the Exodus. There's the big picture of the plagues and of the nation of slaves and freedom and emancipation. There's discussions of equality and free choice, and all of that's phenomenal. But as I said, there's that sub-narrative, that micro picture, that is a simple, ongoing conversation and dialogue between Moses on the one hand and Pharaoh on the other hand. And all Pharaoh shows us, and it's remarkable for the humanity of it, how humane this whole discussion is. All Pharaoh shows us is just how much we struggle to relinquish an illusion of having things under control. And every time Moses sort of reopens the door just a tiny bit for Pharaoh to walk back in and continue the pretense, he does it and says, yeah, you can remove them tomorrow, or, we'll make some sort of arrangement. We can, the men will go, but the women and children will stay here. Every single time Pharaoh has an opportunity to seize that moment and show real humility and real remorse and honesty or self-honesty. He fails to take that opportunity, and it's wasted. And I thought, like, reading through this and watching just how much John Daggett struggles with the fact, this gives you power over me. He doesn't get it. He doesn't get it until it's too late and Bane kills him in the middle of the film. And the film just gets better from that point, even though Daggett's a great character. He just doesn't get it, and neither does Pharaoh. And I think that really to conclude, like one of the struggles that we've seen across the world is people really do struggle, and it's real. It's not an invalid thing. It's a valid struggle. People really do struggle. We really struggle when we're sort of forced to admit that we're just not in control, and we just don't have the power or the authority to make our lives as orderly and as routine based as we wanted them to be, or we still want to be. And I was talking to a couple of friends about a couple of friends, both of them. I was talking to both of my friends about, the hoarding and people, like these horrible scenes of, really unpleasant scenes of like punch ups happening in supermarkets, and like people grabbing stuff out of elderly members' trolleys, and sky high with toilet paper. But so much of that, it's easy to sort of dismiss that as just animalistic selfishness, but a lot of that stems from this fear and this genuine panic that people feel naturally. I have to stay in some way in control of my life. And even if the world around me is collapsing into chaos, at least I know when I get home, I'll have enough kitchen wipes for the next 10 years. And I'll have enough surface cleaner that I could bathe in the stuff. At least I'm in control of those few square meters that I can call my home and my own. And that's really, I think, one of the reasons why we're seeing that sort of behavior. Then the flip side of it, which is a beautiful thing and an amazing thing, is you're watching at the same time so many people give over the reins of control to others. They're looking at those who are the most vulnerable members of society, and they're saying, look, you're probably struggling much more than I am in this horrendous situation. What can I do to empower you? How can I give you more control and power back over your life? What can I do to help you? So you see that contrast of people who really are in pain and struggling to cope with not having the power and control they thought they had. And then on the flip side of that, which is very comforting, we're also seeing people who they're okay with it. They're confident enough in themselves that they know, as we say in Hebrew, "Gamzeh ya'avor," this will pass, this will get better. But in the meantime, I've got to do everything I can to empower others, to give power and control back to those who really, really desperately need it. So that's the story of Bane. That's the story of Tom Hardy. Desperately underrated actor. I don't know if he's won an Oscar, but he should have done. Fantastic character, fantastic trilogy, fantastic film. And as for John Daggett and as for Pharaoh, really, let's try and learn that lesson. Sometimes, and it hurts, we're not in control. Sometimes we live in an illusion that we are. And the sooner I think we have that honesty to take that step back, suddenly the horizon opens up again. And suddenly, even though we are all cooped up in our homes, opportunities do present themselves for us to take back that control in a much more selfless and giving way. Have a lovely evening, everyone, and I wish you all the best. Stay safe, keep your loved ones safe, and let's let go of that power and control for just a minute. Have a great evening.